All right, questions time. Let's see what we got here today. PFT PM Posse always is early in the stack because I follow the account. I'm not playing favorites. It's just the first one I see. With rule changes and the explosion of passing in the NFL, we've been watching offensive production and records just get blown away, but we haven't seen sacks, interceptions, etc. go crazy. Shouldn't they be going up overall too, if only because the number of opportunities are so much higher, or is it the rules? It has a lot to do with the rules. It has a lot to do with the rules. When you protect quarterbacks the way you do, you're going to have fewer sacks. When pass rushers are hypersensitive to the possibility of the roughing the passer, or as Sims calls it, nothing the passer flag, that makes a difference. When offensive linemen are getting away, not just with holding, which at times is blatant. They're not calling holding, and Sims' theory, and I agree with him on this, the defensive linemen collectively are so much better than the offensive linemen right now. They're evening it out to keep the quarterbacks upright, to keep the game moving, to keep the balls in the air, to keep the chains heading down the field and the points coming up on the board. So you get some holding that happens that doesn't get called. And the thing that we really saw happen a lot last year, and I'm interested to see if it occurs this year. And we'll have our rules meeting with the NFL coming up in a couple of weeks. And I wonder if I will remember to ask, what are we doing about left tackles and right tackles who get into their pass block sets a half second early? We're going to call that. We see it all the time. We see it all the time. That's another way to give the offensive line an edge when it comes to protecting the quarterback. So that's why sacks aren't dramatically up and interceptions aren't dramatically up. And look, we know that, and this comes and goes, this emphasis on contact with the receiver as he's trying to get open, but quarterbacks are getting better. There's a lot of good quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are more protected than ever, and the rules are protecting them, and the unofficial non-enforcement of penalties like false start and holding on the offense are helping as well. Another one from PFT PM Posse. I'm loving Father of Mine, but I'm disappointed because I only have about 50 pages left and I don't want it to end. Well, PFT PM Posse, good news is this: a sequel is coming. I don't know when though. See, what I'm doing is, because I originally wrote Father of Mine entirely in the third person narration perspective. And I got to the point year and a half ago where I just didn't like it. And I read another book called The Lincoln Highway that uses the technique of telling the story in not just first person narration start to finish, but first person from different characters. So I rewrote Father of Mine by using first person from different characters, piecing it together that way. There is some third person in there to bridge some of the gaps. So what I've got to do with the sequel to Father of Mine, I've got to go back and rewrite the whole thing with that same approach. And I've got about 4 chapters in to the rewrite. There's over 100 chapters in all because they're short. The problem is I'm working on another manuscript. I'm writing a Western, and what I write is what I enjoy reading. So I like Westerns. So I'll write one. What the hell? I didn't live in the Old West, but who the hell lived in the Old West that ever wrote a Western? How many people out there wrote a Western that actually lived in the Old West? So it's shaped by our expectations and what we've seen in movies and read in books, and that just kind of gets into your head, and from that comes a story that either works or it doesn't. So I kind of want to get that done, at least the first draft done, before I go back and rewrite Father of Mine. So I'd say loosely thinking about timelines, it'll probably be March of 25 that Son of Mine, the sequel to Father of Mine, ends up being available. So I hope you can wait that long, PFT PM Posse. And I like the fact that you're upset that you only have 50 pages left and you don't want it to end. That's one of the things that I love and don't like about a book that I enjoy reading. I don't want it to end. And then once it ends, I got to go find another book that gives me that same experience. And it's kind of like kissing frogs. Like, I'll try this book. It's like, oh, I really didn't do it. Do I finish it? Do I find another one? And then when you find that one that you love, you want to read it all in one sitting. but you also want to spread it out over 2 weeks because you want that experience of having something to look forward to. I want to read the next chapter. I want to see what happens next. I'm engrossed in the story. So I'll take that as a good sign. Also, one other question about that. What was the inspiration for the clown shoes Vinny always wears? You just try to come up with things to make characters a little bit different. You don't want to be stereotypical. You don't want to be cliche. And you just try to find something that just distinguishes them. Vinny's got the big giant feet with the clown shoes, and he's got the hole in his nose from when he had cancer or something. But most of the people who are around him are smart enough not to ask about it because Vinny is a fairly dark and sinister figure. Okay. PFT PM posse, as you mentioned yesterday, can we make PFT PM a weekly thing, especially since many of the questions spark articles, video clips, and other productive conversations? Maybe. I'll just leave it at that, maybe. Because once my routine pivots back to PFT Live every day, I kind of value my productive time for the rest of the day to write stories. I do a bunch of radio. I try to get my workout in, and to carve out another half hour to an hour when I've already devoted 2 hours to PFT Live is not the easiest thing to do. Recliner QB, I think that's also PFT PM posse. How concerned should Cowboys fans be about Zack Martin holding out a training camp? It seems like the team always takes care of their best and quietest players, often to the detriment of the Cap overall team success, but Martin still has top 10 guard contract. I mean, if a guy that quiet is suddenly making noise, and it looks like I've got Martin's contract here and I can take a look at it, but yeah, if a guy who's usually that quiet is suddenly chattering, I think it's something to be concerned about. Tribnick, in light of the current running back market, is there a path to position-specific guilds or unions? Safeties, running backs, and tight ends all seem to be underpaid. This gets back to the point that I made yesterday. I wrote about it today at PFT. Surplus value. The best player at a given position, how much surplus value does he add over and above the average player at the position? At some positions, quarterback, pass rusher, receiver, corner, it's enough that you pay the best players a lot more than the average player gets. At other positions, tight end, running back, safety, kicker, punter, you don't have that same value difference, so you don't have the same price difference. It's that simple. Now, I had an idea earlier today, and it's a thread that I want to pull a little bit when I have a chance to think it through. I'm going to think out loud about it a little bit here. What if the salary cap per team was broken down for each and every team by position? What if instead of a collective overall total salary cap, there was a cap as to what you could pay at each position? I don't think it would really change much, because who would determine what the cap figure is? And the cap figure for running back, if it's driven by historical percentage that goes to running back, it's going to be lower. It's going to be less. So I don't know that that works either. The problem is you've got all different shapes and sizes of players under one umbrella, under one union, and you're going to have diverging interests. And look, I know the quarterbacks get the lion's share of the salary cap, but they still are worth more than what they get, the best ones. The best ones are worth more to the game collectively than they are to their teams. I think quarterbacks should get paid more by the game. Running backs should get paid more by the game. The league-wide fund. As I think about it more and talk about it more, I keep coming back to the idea that Chris Sims had, that we've been thinking about and developing and writing about and talking about. League-wide fund that pays running backs for performance. Playing time, production, touchdowns. If they're the straw that stirs the drink for their team, they're making the league more exciting. Fantasy football, jersey sales, just the overall affection that we have for the players. Maybe there should be a running back series on Netflix or Peacock. Should get Peacock in the mix. But those are the guys that we all clamor to get. First pick in the fantasy drafts is always a running back. The challenge is getting the league and the union to prioritize it, to act on it, to care about it. That's the issue. What do the running backs need to do to get people to care? I care, but I got no say in what ultimately happens. Another one from Tribnick. How close are we to calling the Stafford trade a win-win? Well, that's what every trade should be. I think at some point you have to ask yourself, did the Lions get the better of the trade? I thought they would just tolerate Jared Goff for a couple of years and then move on. Well, it turns out they like him. They're going to give him another year at least. The problem is, for a team that is struggling to just become a playoff contender, Jared Goff moved them to that level. How much higher can he take them? You know, in every industry, sport or otherwise, you'll have people that are assisting you and your broader effort, whatever that effort is, whatever the context is. You've got people who can take you to a certain level. And then you have to make the very hard decision as to whether or not that same person or group of people can get you to the higher level. Do you need to make a change to try to get to the next level? At some point, the Lions, I think, will conclude that they need to make a change at quarterback to get to the next level. But for now, to get 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and a quarterback that filled the role for a couple of years and has 2 years left under his contract, which are very manageable relative to the market, that's a win. And the only thing that makes it somewhat even is that the Rams won a Super Bowl. I mean, a year from now, we may feel differently about it. As that Super Bowl trophy starts to get deeper and deeper into the rearview mirror, and if you're a non-playoff team for consecutive years, yes, no one can take it away. It's there forever, but where are we now? How do we compare to other teams now? How do we turn this thing around? How far are we away from maybe trying to get the next one, whenever the next one may be? Oh, man, this is a great question. I can lob 91. What is the strangest thing you have seen in someone else's house? Damn, that is a good question. There isn't any one thing that comes to mind. The strangest thing I've seen in someone else's house. I'm going to be thinking about that one for the rest of the day. I remember when I was a kid and I delivered newspapers. There was an apartment building on my route. And for whatever reason, this one apartment had a very unique smell that was not pleasant. And I've never smelled it anywhere else. I hope to never smell it again. And if I would ever smell it again, it would take me back to that moment when I would be like collecting. You know, they sent you around. You had to go collect. They didn't invoice you. That was one of the other obligations of having a paper route in the 70s. Go ahead and play the piano music. Oh, wait, we're not on PFT Live. You had to get up early. You had to schlep all the newspapers around, either by foot or on your bike. And then you had to make time every other week to go to all the houses at night. You had to show up on their doorstep and have them pay you. $4.33. That's what it was for the full week of papers. $4.33. Because most of the people on the route got the full week. Some would just get Sunday. It was $186 if you only got Sunday. I can't remember what it was if you only got 5 days a week. There were multiple options. 5 days a week, 5 days plus Saturday, 7 days, and just Sunday. It was $186 for Sunday, $4.33 for the full week. I can't remember the other two, and I'm ashamed to say that I can't remember it. But I went to this guy's apartment. It had that smell. And I remember one time I saw on top of a dresser a can that said bullshit repellent. And I thought for a sec, the smell, is he just spraying that all the time? But I don't know how strange that was, but I remember it 45 years later. So it had an impact on me. But I'm going to be thinking about the strange things I've seen in other people's houses. And maybe I'll have some more for you tomorrow, if I remember. Mr. Palmerson, what can the Giants and Raiders do to ensure that Barkley and Jacobs accept the franchise tag and are full participants throughout the season? Well, they can do 2 things. They can try 2 different things. One, they can offer to not tag them next year as part of this 1-year deal that they can now do. They can offer that term. That's happened in the past with guys like Lance Briggs and Albert Haynesworth. We won't tag you next year. Now, I think with Briggs and Haynesworth, there was a certain performance level that kicked in before that happened. So there was an incentive to go earn your freedom. So you didn't just shut it down and check the box and save yourself for free agency. So it may take something like that. The other thing you do is just offer more money. You can pay them more than $10.1 million. You can offer 12, 11, 13, whatever it takes to get them to show up and commit to 1 year. That's what they can do. But that's never happened. Unless I'm missing something, and there's a chance I am, but I'd like to think I would remember this. At some time since the franchise tag became a thing 30 plus years ago, I do not believe there has ever been an occasion where a franchise tag player got more money on that one-year franchise tender than what the rules otherwise dictate. The Last Samurai. How close is the NFL to adding an 18th game? Are the players able to get any kind of concession from the league, like grass fields or something else, for accepting it before the next CBA? What would be a realistic get for the players? I think the NFL wants to get to 18 games. I think part of the PR dilemma is, how do you justify this intense focus on health and safety with adding another game? But I know from when this all started, when the commissioner was talking about it more than 10 years ago, he wanted 18 games, not 17. 17 was the compromise position. How do you get to 18? The players didn't want to go to 17, and the players were sufficiently up in arms about 17 that it started the pushback against DeMaurice Smith that now has a new executive director ready to take over. What will his position be? Look, you make more money. Everybody makes more money because the players get half of the revenue. But at some point, you don't care if you're the players. You don't care about, because think of it this way. Half the revenue. Let's just call it 50-50. It's not quite 50-50. Let's call it that. Divided among 32 owners, it's a lot more per owner than when you spread it into a salary cap that gets divvied up and teams carry cap space over. They don't spend everything. It's more amorphous to take that extra money and have it impact the take-home pay of a player than it does for an owner. So that's another reason to push back. I still think one of these days there will be 20 regular season games, no preseason games, and then eventually more teams. And maybe there'll be more teams before they get to 20. But at some point, I believe, maybe not in my lifetime, but I believe there will be 20 regular season games, no preseason games, and there will be more teams, maybe eventually as many as 40 teams in the NFL. Ezra Gonzalez, have you heard anything on the Danielle Hunter situation in Minnesota? I have not. Interesting to see whether or not he shows up for the start of training camp. Let's see what else we have here. I should wrap this up. Getting closer to... Oh, yeah, I've got radio in Chicago at noon, so I've got to wrap it up by then. What's your favorite game day snack? Spidey 2Y banana. Well, it depends on where I am. If I'm home, it's the freshly baked pepperoni roll from Tomorrow's Bakery. My wife goes over there and helps out on Sundays, and she brings me home multiple hot, well, still warm, fresh from the oven pepperoni rolls, and that's usually part of my pregame ritual on Sundays when I'm here. When I'm in Connecticut, probably what I'll do is at halftime, this isn't very exciting, but at halftime of the first game, the early games, I'll get a cup of coffee and a couple chocolate chip cookies or lemon bars, depending upon what the selection is that day. So it's not very good. I know that's not very exciting, but I'm not very exciting if you haven't figured that out by now. Let's see what else we have. Ryan Vergens. Would Brian Dabo make it to the top 10 if the Giants have a good playoff run and a miracle Super Bowl run this year? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Because I can't do the top 10 in a vacuum. You got to rank them compared to everyone else. Depends on what others do. It depends on who does well and what it will take to eliminate and wipe out future guarantees. Those are the three things. There's not much else to negotiate. And ideally, you want to get all your players signed before they even step on the field. If you're an agent, you want to get all your clients signed before they ever step on a field for an off-season workout, because you can get injured at that. And I know you have a letter of protection that guarantees that you're going to get the contract you're getting. I don't like playing those games. Just give me my contract before I come to work. I want to be under contract. And more players are. But yes, Bryce Young is unsigned, and that'll become an issue because it's about time for players to start showing up. It's about time for me to shut it down. One more question. JC, while you're working, do you listen to music? If so, who? I don't listen to music while I'm working on PFT. What I do is I put on TV or streaming or whatever as kind of background noise. When I'm writing down in the barn, I will listen to music, and it just depends on whatever mood I'm in. I'll hear a song and it makes me think, okay, well, I'm gonna pull up that group on my streaming app and just play all their songs. And I'll go from Johnny Cash, I'll go to the Beatles, I'll go to Bruce Springsteen. I've listened to a lot of Bruce Springsteen writing over the years. It's very inspirational because he writes in such brilliantly simple terms. I try to do the same thing. I mentioned Johnny Cash. I went through an English beat phase where I listen to them constantly, but it's just kind of whatever, like I think of this group, I think of that group, and I'll listen to them for a little while, and then I'll pivot to something else. One song that I heard on the radio coming back from the beach that I hadn't thought of in years, and I've just listened to it once a day, and I'll eventually fade out from interest in it, but I had it on last night. Paradise by the Dashboard Light by Meatloaf. And I was listening to some other Meatloaf, and Meatloaf is better than I remember. Paradise by the Dashboard Light is great. It's almost like a Green Day song where it's, and I know it was prior to Green Day, but it's like one long song with like 5 or 6 songs mashed into it. Very well done. Very unique for the time frame, because the whole idea was they got to be 3 minutes long or 2 minutes long or 4 minutes long. You know, you never had a song 4 minutes long. This was like something from a Broadway musical where it just goes on and on and on and on. So anyway.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.